Fallout New Vegas, developed by Obsidian Entertainment and published by Bethesda Softworks in 2010, is a, fantastic video game. It is a post-apocalyptic role-playing game where, in this timeline, war has leveled America, and what remains are tribes who have largely emerged from vaults that sheltered certain communities from the nuclear fallout. In it, you play as a courier who has recently run into a string of bad luck and unfortunately lost the package they were meant to deliver, while also acquiring 2 bullets to the head. You survive, but are rendered a partial amnesiac who doesn't really know where they've been or where they're going now. You are then set loose into the Mojave desert during what turns out to be a pretty tumultuous time for the region, allowing you to be the hero, the villain, or something in between. As I mentioned, this game was developed by Obsidian Entertainment, who I affectionately refer to as the other guys. Primarily because in my eyes they would come in and make an improved sequel to games I already liked. 2 of the first RPGs I can remember having a big influence over me were Bethesda's Morrowind and BioWare's Knights of the Old Republic. I loved KOTOR, but I ended up loving KOTOR 2 even more. It felt much darker and grittier than I remember the first being. It was as if some real-world philosophy had seeped into the generic world of only light and dark, and it was exciting to teenage me. Fallout 3 would release in 2008. I remember being on a cruise at the time and just bursting at the seams with excitement to get off the boat and get to the game. I loved it so much. I thought shooting Tenpenny's head off and it flying down the tower to be the coolest thing I'd ever seen in a video game. I posted a recording of it to YouTube the next day labeled the most epic video game moment ever, and somehow my soundless clickbait got over 100,000 views. Obsidian would come along eventually and give Fallout a similar treatment as KOTOR 2. This is fitting in a way as Obsidian is made up of former Black Isle Studio employees who had a direct hand in creating the first 2 games in the series. It can be viewed as the Fallout franchise coming home, although only for this single entry. Similar to KOTOR 2, the resulting game was deeper and more ambitious than the game preceding it, but it came with a slew of problems, namely crashes, jank, and corrupt save files. Fallout New Vegas is a game I have a lot of memory playing at release and beyond, but upon going through both my Steam profile and my Xbox gamertag, there is no evidence that I played beyond the first few hours of the game. My gamertag had no record of me ever playing the game, and my Steam profile showed a measly 2 achievements that I'd gotten back in 2010 when the game came out. In my mind, I had beaten the game at least once, as I definitely have an outline of the story and the characters, but it's very likely that with 14 years and half a dozen deep dive videos I've watched, my brain may have created some false memories. Regardless, it was time for me to do my own documented deep dive. I'm glad I did, as this must be one of the most expansive and open RPGs to have existed until Baldur's Gate 3 came out. But where Baldur's Gate 3 is more focused on a vertical slice of possibilities, constrained by the location you're in and where you're at in the story, New Vegas is a vast desert of them. As soon as your character comes to and you've left Doc Mitchell's house, you are free to go in whatever direction you want and, more importantly, kill anyone you want. New Vegas is designed with countless fail-safes that allow you to play how you want, even if it means having to shift its story in a way that most developers would be afraid of. Obsidian are not interested in controlling your experience and give freedom to the player. Combined with the intelligent writing and multi-layered quest design, Fallout New Vegas is a unique style of open-world RPG that we just do not see anymore. I had my fair share of problems during my first playthrough, which I'll get into in a bit, but Fallout New Vegas is a game that still holds up really well today and is worth exploring for both old and new fans alike. Just make sure to read the manual and look up some community fixes if this is your first time playing. Alright, so the setup of Fallout New Vegas is one that I'm sure many of you will know, but I'll recap the best I can. Around 200 years prior to the game beginning, there was a great war between the United States and China that would eventually lead to nukes being dropped, obliterating the continental United States. As the war was heating up, a company called Vault-Tec began building bomb shelters, but there was a catch. Vault-Tec weren't actually trying to help protect people per se, but rather experiment on these closed insular societies once they're inside the vaults. Weird stuff like leaders being elected randomly on set terms or storing large amounts of explosives inside for no reason. Well, sometime after the bombs fell, these vault dwellers would eventually leave their vaults and settle in the wasteland that the war had wrought. Taking a moment here to appreciate how wonderful of an idea this is for telling short stories. New Vegas has to be one of the best environmental storytelling in gaming, and funnily enough is quite similar to Dark Souls in that respect. Through some careful planning and luck, a man named Robert House was able to protect a part of the Vegas Strip from the bombs, and this is the place we now know as New Vegas. It has become a symbol for the Mojave, its shining lights a beacon to the glory of the old world, and how one day it may be rebuilt under House's banner. He's not the only player with his eyes set on being the sole power of the Mojave. There is also the New California Republic, which is kind of like the standard government type faction, horribly corrupt and inefficient. Our third faction vying for the Mojave is called Caesar's Legion, slavers that have come from the east, destroying or assimilating any tribe it comes across on its march westward. That's the scene. A post-apocalyptic wasteland powered by pre-war technologies in the hands of wildly different tribes and factions who don't fully understand the destructive power they hold. War. War never changes. I'm sorry I had to. Alright, enough set dressing, let's get into the meat of the game. The combat in Fallout New Vegas is a hybrid of first-person shooting and an active turn-based system that allows you to use a resource to slow down time and aim for specific body parts on an opponent. What felt best for me, and is probably common for most people, is using a hybrid of the two, normally opening up with VATS, and then going back to real time while action points recharge. I haven't played much of the original two Fallouts, but I have played some, and I do feel like this is a mostly successful recreation of that combat system found in those games. Notable about the combat is the limb damage system. Enemies you come across will have different limbs you can aim at, which will affect their combat effectiveness. Think shooting an enemy in the leg to make them limp, or shooting the gun out of their hands. This is a lot of fun and a cheeky bit of gore for us to enjoy. The combat as a whole proved to be a bit hit or miss for me at times, but I think this may have been due to my own ignorance of its systems. I use this analogy in my Baldur's Gate 1 review, but the same applies here. Playing older games is a bit like going ice skating. When you first get to the rink, you probably suck really bad. You start blaming external factors. Oh, this ice is too slippery, oh, these damn communal skates must be busted, etc, etc. After an hour or two though, you've stopped falling on your ass and you're actually having a pretty good time of it. Too bad though, it's time to go home, and who knows when you'll ever go ice skating again. The same applies for New Vegas. I had a lot of fun in the early game, but by the mid-game I was starting to feel a slog. I started losing my drive to play because I found the enemies I was coming up against were just too bullet spongy. This led me to running out of ammo and healing items. I didn't feel like I was struggling to survive, it felt more like I was struggling to have fun. I eventually nailed this down to the blaringly obvious reason, which was the fact that I chose to play the game in hardcore mode. Hardcore mode was kind of a pioneer of the survival game genre, adding in thirst, hunger, and sleep for Fallout New Vegas, as well as adding weight to ammunition and slower healing. Your companions can also die permanently instead of just getting knocked out. Since I mentioned ammunition weight, I should quickly mention the game's inventory. It has one. It uses a weight system to determine how much you can carry. Playing without hardcore mode, this is a pretty lenient system that allows you to become a walking arsenal, which is something that I feel like this game encourages both in the play and theme. Sure, your weapons and armor sets still add to your carry weight, but you can carry as much ammo as you want, meaning you can keep a wider variety of guns on you. In every game that has ever existed, the more guns you can carry at once, the more fun you can have. I think what happened to me is I was doing pretty well on hardcore mode in the beginning, but eventually the game started snowballing against me. I had no more healing items, I had no more ammo. I didn't want to go to the next combat dungeon because I was afraid of not being able to complete it, and maybe needing to go back on another shuttle run to the Lucky 38. This was, of course, entirely my fault. The game explicitly tells you it does not recommend playing in hardcore mode, and that it's only for the hardcore. I figured that I played the game before, I should be just fine. But the last time I even remember playing this game was like 2013. I was overconfident, and I don't think New Vegas should be blamed for it. To make it even more my fault, you can turn off hardcore mode at any time, but I was already 20 hours in when these feelings of resentment started building in me, and I was too stubborn. I wanted the achievement, and by God, I got it. To bring this back to the ice skating analogy, yes, the scales eventually tipped my way because in these games the player character will always end up overpowered, but at the same time I got significantly better at playing the game the way it's meant to be played. By the end of the game, I wasn't a visitor of the Mojave, I was a resident, which basically meant I would have to play the game again. Because while I still experienced the quests unhindered, my opinion of the gameplay was tainted by my lack of experience in fucking hardcore mode. I would definitely advise reading the manual that comes included with the Steam version of the game, but failing that, my number one pro tip is that you can repair your weapons and armor by merging duplicates together. The amount of pain this would have alleviated for me is astronomical, because while I had 100 repair skill, vendors still wanted like 18,000 caps to repair just one of my guns. I had been kicked out of every one of the game's casinos for winning too much, and yet I still couldn't afford to repair my guns. I was so mad, and begrudgingly played forward, not realizing, well, I was the big idiot to blame. Alright, wow, that was a long tirade about hardcore mode that was meant to be just about the gameplay, but I think I needed to get that frustration and then realization off my chest. So, how's the combat on my second playthrough? It's pretty good. Solid stuff. The combat really isn't the best part of New Vegas, but it is a joy to roam the wasteland with two companions, blasting enemies and causing trouble. There are dozens of weapons to collect, and the different categories add slight variation to how you approach things. My first playthrough I stupidly went with laser weapons, which, they feel different to normal guns, which feel different to explosives. Explosives are a lot of fun, and this game just brings some extra stim packs. Okay, so the doctor has just fixed you up and you're now free to explore at your leisure. What should you do first? Well, you should go have a chat with the fine people of Good Springs and catch your bearings. Talking in Fallout New Vegas is standard fare RPG stuff. You ask questions, you get answers. The thing that makes talking to New Vegas NPCs feel special is everyone is from somewhere. This guy came from the vault, this guy is a former NCR soldier, this guy is in town down the road and is giving you a quest to flip off someone else further down the road. There is a real sense of history and place here, and NPCs will happily give you their opinions on the different factions and events of the wasteland. New Vegas NPCs are fully voiced, and I think this might just be the most voiced dialogue I've ever heard in a game. Conversation trees just keep going, and this adds to the feeling of actually conversing with these people. They've got just as much to say as you've got questions to ask, and a lot of the time you'll be sick of asking questions before you run out of them, which is a good thing. The sense of place is elevated by the fact you'll tend to ask a lot of the same questions to many different people, resulting in different answers based on who they are, where they are, and who they're associated with. If you ask 5 NPCs what their opinion is of the new California Republic, you'll probably get 5 different answers, even if those NPCs were in the same bar. You also get the sense that these NPCs know of and have histories with each other, even if it's never directly referenced in a quest. Even though Johnny and Sally have 2 completely different quest lines that never intersect, it still makes sense they know each other because Sally lives down the road and has to get supplies from Johnny's shop. There is only one generic raider faction in the game, and even them you're able to converse with and learn some history. There are around a dozen different factions in the game, and they all have their own reputation meter, measuring how they feel about you. While in the long run this boils down to what quests will be available to you, and whether or not they'll shoot on sight, there's still a bit of flavour in this system, in the way that it recognises if you've been both good and bad to a faction, with a title like Smiling Troublemaker. It's a bit superficial, but it's fun to get to different levels of reputations and see how it changes the NPC barks towards you. Getting and losing reputation is pretty standard stuff. Completing quests and tasks will build reputation, while stealing, killing, or working too much with the enemy factions will lose your reputation. Good reputation means more quests, dialogue choices, and better prices from vendors of that faction. Bad reputation means the opposite. Your choice of skills will play a big part in how you interact with the world and NPCs. You'd think this only applies to your speech skill, but New Vegas is ever so lovingly covered in skill checks all over the world. I imagine in my mind that they had a quota for every single skill having a certain number of skill checks, so no single skill feels like a dud, and they did a great job here. At times this does result in some quests being gated in a way that doesn't feel as natural as the quest design would appear, but it is super satisfying if you just happen to have the right skills. A lot of quests in the game require a certain check to get what you'd consider the optimal outcome, and you'll often end up taking the less optimal route simply because you don't have the right skills leveled up. As I was going through my first playthrough, I took note of some of these checks and made sure I was ready for them the second time around. This is to say though that the quest design is very open and allows for creative thinking. Nothing beats assassinating a target by planting a C4 charge on them and hitting the detonator just out of sight. The open world of New Vegas is, to me, quite impressive. While a lot more restrictive than it appears when you start out, the opening few hours is a masterclass on quest and world design. While you can go in any direction you want, I bet the majority of people did the exact same things up until they reached Novak. Help out Good Springs, run into some powdered gangers, down to Prim, and then most likely to Nipton or the Mojave outpost. If you're the kind of person who restarts in these open world games a lot, it's probably a bit too on the rails for your taste. You can go north, straight to the New Vegas Strip, but this area is littered with high-level enemies, meaning most players won't succeed in going that way. This semi-linearity is used to great effect. This feels more like a curated section than the rest of the game, designed to teach you about the main factions and give you plenty of role-playing decisions allowing you to form what kind of character you want to be naturally. The world of New Vegas is largely flat, with mountain ranges acting as walls to stop you from running in a straight line for too long. While exploring, you'll often see locations from a great distance, and there are a lot of cool landmarks to discover. Locations you'll stumble on range from expansive towns to small farmsteads and caves. The smaller locations are often short stories that are told through the environment or notes you can find around the place. Sometimes it'll just be someone's shack and whatever story you can devise from what they have in there, but more often than not these locations will have items that can permanently raise your stats. One good example I can think of was a farmstead I came across with malnourished animals and a burned down home. I managed to find pages 3 and 4 of a diary from a child who lived in this place. It described a child whose parents had turned into irradiated monsters, who the child then had to put down to protect themselves. After this, the child started growing paranoid that the same thing would happen to the animals, and they would try to eat the child. The kid ended up burning themselves alive in the home so, quote, there'd be nothing left to eat, unquote. I never found page 1 or 2, and I feel like they purposely left out so the player can imagine the scenes that played out themselves. This is pretty sad, but in a delicious 2-sentence horror short story kind of way. New Vegas is packed to the brim with these, and I'm all there for it. I have dozens of examples of this, which I won't get into, but this is something that makes New Vegas such a special game. A collection of short stories that aren't just gleaned from what people tell you, but from what you see and find yourself. This is a game that rewards careful inspection, and for those that have played the game, Vault 11 is a great example of this. When I first went through the vault, I kind of thought it was a nothing burger, and left it promptly as I didn't have any quest or reason to be there. Big mistake. There was a real delicious tragedy story down here, and I'm glad I knew to pay attention the second go around. The game features about a half dozen companions that are all varying levels of interesting. Whether it's false memories or not, I feel like I've known Boone and Eddie my whole life. Every time I play, I tend to travel with these two, but I'm also known to break out at Arcade the Scientist and Rex the Robo-Dog too. They seem kind of shallow at first, but travel with them for a bit and they'll begin to open up, usually opening up a companion quest that can upgrade them. For this review, I decided I'd play all the DLCs, and they're all pretty good. I'd consider them essential to play as they're all at least mentioned a few times in the base game and add a lot to the already established world building. To be honest, they're kind of like a game of their own, so maybe that's something to explore for a future video. Anyway, after 3,700 words, I imagine the only thing left to talk about is the game's presentation. If I've missed anything about the gameplay that's important to you, which is an almost certainty, please let me know in the comments. Out of a desire to give these videos a conversational tone, I don't really map out the things I want to talk about or go off notes, so the things that are included are the burning topics that I feel like I have something to add to. I'm sure after watching this video you can probably tell. The graphics in this game, well, they haven't aged well, but it's still impressive for the time. I can't remember what the draw distance was like on consoles, but on a modern PC, there literally is no fog and you can see the entire horizon. Obsidian did the best they could with the muddy-ass engine they were given to work with, and it shows. There are so many cool creature and armor designs here, both new and borrowed from other games in the series. I believe this is the first Fallout game without power armor on the front of the cover, instead having an NCR Ranger, and it looks equally as badass. While the terrain looks like it's from Giant's Citizen Kabuto, there's still plenty of finer details to enjoy. Sound design here is fucking awesome. And no, I'm not talking about the radio stations, I'm talking about the guns, the interface interactions, the voice acting. It's all fantastic. Sidebar, fantastic is probably my most used praise word, so it's nice to be able to use it with reckless abandon in this review. Both because the game is fantastic, and because of fantastic. You'll meet fantastic. You'll love fantastic. It'll be fantastic. Walking the Mojave with the radio off has been some of my favourite exploring in an open world RPG because of the ambient music that plays while doing so. It's quiet and minimalist, adding a sense of dread to your adventures. If you're not in the mood for dread in your wacky wasteland adventure, well, you always have the 9 songs the radio has to offer, Big Iron and whatnot, Johnny Guitar. In the radio's defense though, Wayne Newton as Mr. New Vegas reading news stories that chronicle your adventure is something that you just can't miss. As someone who's still new to the world of video game YouTube reviews, it's always been a question in my mind, when do I review New Vegas? It seems almost like a rite of passage for new tubers, something that must be done carefully and with reverence. I had my ups and downs with the game over 145 hours and 2 playthroughs. I played this game over the span of almost 3 months, at times force-feeding more playtime to feel like I've done my due diligence. Fallout New Vegas is a fantastic game with open-world quest design that isn't really seen anymore, and such a comprehensive, believable world which can sometimes seem verbose, but it's entirely worth it. The effort was put in here. Your curiosity will be rewarded when you read that extra terminal log or poke around a bit in that cave. You can feel good playing this game, knowing you're in good hands and that the Mojave will look after you. I had a blast becoming a citizen of the Mojave, and I want to thank you for listening to my adventures in it. I'll see you next video.